hello everybody. It might be good evening, good afternoon, happy lunchtime, wherever you are in the world. It's going to be a little bit of a special one really, because I've been looking and wanting to do this conversation for quite some time. And I really want to, before I introduce them, thank my guests for sharing their time today. Diversity, equity and inclusion is something that everybody is talking about, and we're no different here at the Coaching Academy. And I believe fundamentally that coaching and the coaching world doesn't yet have the diversity that we might wish for. At the Coaching Academy, we have been working behind the scenes towards being a training provider where our students feel seen, valued and representative. However, we are also aware that there's always more work to do, and we are constantly working on that behind the scenes. Now, we are also working towards supporting all of our students and graduates to have a greater awareness and be just more informed about equity, diversity and inclusion, and how that affects clients, how that affects our clients' coaching experience on an individual basis, as well as how it affects us and our coaching businesses. So this is just the start of more awareness raising, training sessions, discussions that we hope that this will springboard for you guys within your networks, but also the start of what we are planning here at the Coaching Academy today. Now, I want to explore with my guests what this actually means for us as a coach and as a coaching profession. And I really want you to feel that this is part of a wider conversation that society needs generally. However, today, the focus is very much on coaching, but it is important for us to have these conversations. Now, sometimes when we discuss this stuff, it feels uncomfortable. And what I'm going to say is good, because where is the best place for us to be able to talk about this stuff, but within that lovely, supportive, non-judgmental environment of coaching? So my aim today is to give all of us a space to reflect on the value of EDI in your coaching practice, to begin to continue to open up and normalize conversations within your coaching circles, what this means to us all as being a professional coach. So without further ado, my guests today are Merlinder, and I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly, Merlinder. And one of the things I wanted to do before we started was to get the correct pronunciation. So forgive me in advance. Merlinder Orjela, is that correct, Merlinder?
Orjela.
Oh, Orjela, right.
Don't worry.
I never know if it's a silent sound or a j sound. Or, yeah, brilliant. Thank you. See, again, this is about awareness, isn't it? And getting people's names correct. Anyway, Merlinder is a DE&I training consultant, and she's also an ICF coach, mentor, and business psychologist. Merlinder's working with here internally with us at the Coaching Academy. She's an accredited coach for the ICF at PCC level. We've also got a TCA trainer, Makwana, and Krush delivers a session within our corporate and executive coaching model. If you're doing that, you may well have come across her already. And the lovely Leonie Worrell, personal coach and also a graduate of the Coaching Academy and program strategist, who was very great in reaching out to me in the first place and encouraging me to have this conversation. So I'm eternally grateful for her to really get this conversation started. So we're going to look together at discussing the importance of diversity, inclusion and equity in the coaching world. So as I say, it's going to be a little bit different from our sort of formal in sort of discussions. We're going to be exploring 3 areas. So as I say, give you some space to sort of reflect on the value of EDI in your coaching practice. Begin or continue to open up and normalize conversations. Give us some tools to be able to do that within our coaching sessions, and look at what that actually means to us. Now, I want to sort of state from the outset that, I want to recognize that everybody has different lived experiences, and we can only speak from our own perspective and experiences. And I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to go into breakout rooms today. And so it's important that we create that safe psychological space so that we avoid minimizing or dismissing anyone else's lived experiences, which is really important. So let me start off, first of all, with just sharing a little word cloud. Grab your phones and open it up at the camera and just hover over the QR code, which should be appearing on your screen right now. So once you get that QR code, it will take you to a little link. Just click on the link. And then I would love for you guys just to start typing in any words or phrases that come to mind when we think about diversity and inclusion. Great, look at all of that. And it is so different, isn't it? There are lots of different things coming up here, and the beautiful word cloud: a fair world, belonging, not judgment, togetherness, what's inclusive for some is not for all. What have we got? Learning, fairness, respect, not overlooking, safety, trauma responsiveness. Such a huge area, as we can see already, just populating on the screen. I'd love to ask, first of all, my three guests, when we look at that wonderful different words and phrases that are coming up on the screen. Let me start off with you, Leonie. What comes to mind when you sort of see all of those gorgeous words there on the screen?
Definitely psychological safety, I think, is paramount when we're having any conversation about inclusivity, equity, like anything on that spectrum. Being safe to bring that to the conversation and being in the room and having that conversation, I think, is super important.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for starting us off. Merlinder, what about for you?
I'm zooming in on one. There's some great words here. Using pronouns is not inclusive for many. So these things that we put in place and thinking about them broader, I think that's standing out to me.
Brilliant, thank you. And Krush, what jumps out at you?
For me, I'm just really personally happy to see how holistic this word cloud is in terms of all of the things that are coming to mind when we think about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can see how huge this particular area is when it comes to sort of thinking about, you know, how we support our clients, and also maybe what it means to us isn't necessarily what it means to other people as well, which is really, really important for us to be aware of. Wonderful, fantastic. Okay. What I'd love to do is just to share another slide with you in a second around what we actually mean by diversity, equality and inclusion, because it is, again, something that, you know, what it means to us can mean something very different to others. So I've taken this particular definition from some training that I attended with a company called coachesofcolor.com. And as you can see here, their definition of inclusion is about people with different identities, feeling and or being valued and welcomed within a given setting. Inclusive organisation is one which values and proactively seeks to include its people. Equity, an approach that ensures people have access to the same opportunities, about recognising that everyone is different, yet treating everyone with an equal level of respect, ensuring that they have equal opportunity, access and benefit from things like work, learning and services. And diversity, the presence of difference within a given setting, recognising, respecting, valuing and drawing on the positive aspects of differences, not just the obvious ones of gender, ethnicity, disability and age, but also the less visible differences such as background, belief, sexual orientation, personality, learning or work style. And I thought that was really interesting for us to be able to think about and share, because a lot of those words within that definition actually came up in that word cloud. And certainly for me, equity, I think, acknowledges that things are hard for some, that are not necessarily for others. And acknowledging our differences and differing needs means that when we are able to meet people where they are and acknowledge who we are and other people are as individuals. And certainly, as I say, you know, I think it's really something to acknowledge that, you know, coaching and the coaching world doesn't have the diversity we might wish for. And I mean that, say, in that widest sense of the world, encompassing all of those things. And it's quite interesting because I'm also a member of the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development from my background in human resources and learning and development. And this month's magazine, interestingly, it's all over this month's magazine as well, the Profession magazine. And I think they, like us in the coaching world, are very aware that perhaps as a profession, it's not representative. Certainly the HR world acknowledges that it's very female dominated. And I think the coaching world is very female dominated. And it's just about, you know, being mindful of that and making sure we're inclusive of everyone. So the first thing that I want to do is start to think about what EDI means from the perspective of being an ICF accredited coach. So ethics, core competencies, etc. So I'm going to pass over to the lovely Merlinder. And just, Merlinder, would you mind just sort of sharing from your perspective what that all means to us when we start to think about core competencies and the ICF, because we want to ensure that when we're working with our clients, we are working within that code of ethics that, you know, is about keeping everyone safe.
Yeah, definitely. So the ICF competencies that came out, I think 2019 into effect 2021, were reviewed, and there was quite a lot. There's a document where this came from. There was quite a lot around diversity and inclusion in it. It was thought about, it was researched and put into the competencies. I remember when I first saw the list of competencies, I thought, oh, they make sense. They're a bit more, they feel more accessible. Bearing in mind I'd had training before, so maybe that has something to do with it too. And if you look at these, those are the ICF competencies, the 8, so demonstrating ethical practices, embodies a coaching mindset, so how we think about our own coaching and our own self-awareness, establish and maintains agreements, cultivates trust and safety, maintains presence, listens actively, evokes awareness, and facilitates client growth. And you'll see those markers on the side refer to something in diversity and inclusion. So they all have diversity and inclusion pieces. And if you look at the sort of cultivates trust and safety, that's a big one, right? Maintains presence, really important into how we work with our clients. Listens actively is another one, and evokes awareness where we're going forward. That's really there as well, but it goes throughout. And if we go into the next slide, we'll look a little bit at the wording. So if you're not an ICF coach, that's fine as well. If you're not a coach, that's fine. It's just thinking about the wording that's being used within these competencies. So respects the client's identity, language, context, experiences, environments, values, and beliefs. So there's quite a bit around that. So respect coming from our word cloud as well. So there's a lot around our own development as a coach and our intuition. So our assumptions that we're making, right? What are we learning? That growth mindset. Oh, maybe I assume something there, and next time we learn and do it differently, which is all about coaching, but it's also a huge part of diversity inclusion, that awareness. There's a lot around empathy. So that understanding coming in, which I think is really important, comes into respecting another's perspective as well. And there's also responsive, observant, curious, these very open, descriptive wording, which creates this environment for clients as well. And comfortable working with strong emotions. So you don't only get that with diversity and inclusion, for sure, but that definitely comes in as well, that we're comfortable with it, that might be uncomfortable for our client, we can hold that space for them. So integrates words, tones of voice, and body language. So that active listening, it's not just listening, it's a bit more than that. So we're bringing in the words they're using, the tone of voice, what they're doing with their bodies as well. And there's a lot around partnering, so that comes up a few times, and we talk about co-creation a lot in coaching as well. So that's just a little bit of an overview, and where the ICF competencies are now. They might develop, I don't know, but it's just something to think about in terms of your coaching and how that links in to diversity and inclusion.
Brilliant, thank you so much. It's a really lovely insight. I think it's important to remember that, you know, that some of it is unconscious, and potentially we might be doing some of it already, but also if we're not actively aware that the framework within the ICF is there to protect you know, us and our clients in the wider sense of the word, actually then we have no understanding of you know, potentially where we might be going. And something that you said actually a little bit earlier, that sort of making assumptions and sort of the empathy, I think, you know, that's really important, isn't it? Just being aware that, you know, our clients' lived experience is not necessarily the same lived experience that we might have. So we can be empathic, but we don't know. So we can't assume. So before we move on, Merlinder, because I just think this is just a really nice sort of place to sort of frame the conversation. In your opinion, and I know you do lots of this sort of stuff, you know, this is your, you do lots of diversity and inclusion consultancy work. How important is the knowledge of the markers within the ICF framework important to us when we are working as a coach?
I think they can be a good guideline, like a reminder. If you, I mean, for me, I think it was very helpful going into diversity and inclusion piece where, you know, when someone's dealing with something difficult, we might be staying, if you go back to the slide before, it might not be moving forward, you're holding the presence, right? You're cultivating trust and safety. Without that, how much can you actually do in diversity, inclusion, or coaching? I do wonder. So, and then maintaining the presence, right? And listening actively. If someone's going through something difficult, that has a huge impact, and they overlap. These competencies do overlap. And if you're ready to go into this evokes awareness, some amazing things can happen in coaching. I think we've experienced that, but it's up to the client as well, and meeting them where they are. But I think it helps understand, okay, this is part of our framework. We use it, we think about it. We also think about our role in it too, because there's assumptions, what's gone in my head, what am I judging that is not maybe coaching. So I think that helps with understanding, and also looking at where we want to focus and improve on. You know, we have different strengths within those competencies, and we develop them at different stages, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Lovely, thank you. So moving on then, which sort of really sort of emphasizes the points that were starting to come out here. When we look at this picture, we might see two different things. We might only see one thing. And the reason why I've brought this slide in is because all of this is all about perspective. And perspective causes us to see different things. And because of that, we experience life differently. And just because we have a perspective in a particular thing or space or environment doesn't mean that the people that we're working with or our fellow coaches might have that same perspective. So never can we assume anything here. So I'm going to sort of open up the sort of discussion to my three guests, really. So one of the things that Merlinder mentioned within that first part was around working with our clients with that unconditional positive regard. Now, when I very first started on my journey in EDI, I've done lots of background training, and Krush and I have had lots of conversations about that in the past and around what my potential perspective was on that, with me being a majority in a minority space sometimes. Is that enough, do we think? So do we think that being a coach and working with our clients with a sense of unconditional positive regard is enough when it comes to, you know, the EDI? I'll come to you first, Krush.
I think that's a great question there, Sharon, in regards to is it enough? I think the answer that from me is really twofold. Yes, with the added overlay of, for me, I always, as a coach, I'm conscious of my own potential unconscious bias, also the fact that I hold my code of ethics in very high regard. And as a coach, everything I do follows the core coaching competencies. So with the positive unconditional regard and those other things I've just mentioned, which means by virtue of those elements, I'm being non-judgmental, I'm not making assumptions, so on and so forth. I'm therefore making what I do with my clients accessible and being mindful, I suppose, of things that I might not see or hear that I need to be looking out for or just paying attention to.
Lovely, thanks. I'm going to come to you next, Leonie. So is it enough for us as coaches just to be aware of that unconditional positive regard?
I think awareness is great. I think it creates a beautiful story of what the future could be. I don't think it's enough, because I feel the implementation of that is more important than ever. But we have to start from somewhere, right? And I think one of the things that I put on the cloud last minute though was critical thinking. And I think this is where we can know the theory and we can know the topics and the titles of things, but the critical thinking behind that with empathy, I think would be a great start to this journey, because I don't think it will ever be enough, because I feel like this is an infinite situation. It's a start, and I think it's more about, you know, we always talk about the journey rather than the destination, and I think it's always going to be a journey. So similar to Krush, where I think it's twofold of it's great, it's a great starting point, but it's the implementation as coaches when working with clients, so I think is the most important part.
Lovely. And I love the fact, you know, that point that you said there, you know, it's definitely not, you know, it's not about the destination, it's the journey and who we become in that journey as well. I mean, I've definitely grown and developed, but, you know, I'm just on the start of my journey for sure. And we'll all be in different places and different spaces. Brilliant. Merlinder, what about you?
Similar answer, I think. So it's a good start. If I think about coaching, there's a lot more to coaching than just positive regard, right? So that's what's coming up for me. There's a lot more to it. I think diversity as well, there's a lot more to it than just being positive. So sort of being able to go deeper, being able to sort of address these difficult pieces. And, you know, sometimes it's hard stuff, right? And there's also some pieces that are, you know, that are part of coaching, which are challenging, right? Which are really, you know, part of that critical thinking. Good one, Leonie. Bringing that in, thinking about things differently that we need to bring in. And it's part of coaching, part of diversity, and how we see that going forwards. There's a lot more to it, I think.
Brilliant, absolutely. And as I say, you know, where best to start these conversations than within coaching. And all of the lovely skills that we have to be able to rapportfully challenge and have the tools to be able to get those conversations going. Let's talk about the practicalities for us as coaches. So really, where I want to start to move us towards now is our discovery calls, our websites, our coaching materials. You know, what about that for inclusivity? So how do we start to consider making reasonable adjustments maybe that our clients might require? So I'm going to go back to, we'll start with Leonie first. What are your thoughts on the practical things that a coach or a coach in training can start to consider?
I think definitely going back to the drawing board with your vision as a coach. I think it's imperative that we understand why we got into coaching in the first place. And if you understand and boil down the crux of coaching, I know we talk a lot about having a niche and specifically working with a type of person, or they might be in a particular profession, but inside of that niche, how are you building that infrastructure so that people feel welcomed, people feel warm in that process? And I also think once you figure out your vision, what is the mission on the way there, and who are you bringing along? And having that honest conversation with yourself so that you can then have that honest conversation with your clients. I feel like if you're not honest with yourself, then how can you stand in front of a client and say, yeah, let's coach you and get you from you know, from A to B when you're not even at B yourself? And I think it's that that raw grit that I think coaches need to step into now when they are working with people that might not necessarily look like them, that might not necessarily learn like them, and making sure that they are equipped. You know, even when we talk about the paperwork and the calls that you have before stepping into that agreement, what are we looking at here? Do they need to read something a different way? Are they comfortable being on camera? All of these things to make sure that everyone's not just invited to the party, but also being spoken to at the party, because diversity is one thing, right? You invite everyone along, and the inclusivity is actually everyone having fun in that party. We're not just tick boxing certain parts. So I think trying not to make the practical process a tick box, but to also embrace it. I know you're going to get things wrong. So contracting with that client beforehand, especially if you can see that you're polar opposites of that person, just contracting and just being human and letting that person know you don't have all the answers. But yeah, I would say to start from that end practically, and starting off in having a great moment with that client before the coaching process starts.
Wonderful, love that, Leonie. Merlinder, you're a lot further down the line in your professional coaching than a lot of us here today in the call, and your experience and background as well. So, you know, what do you think around the practicalities as a coach? You know, sort of things that we can start to consider and think about, building on what Leonie's already shared.
A really good point. I think it develops over time as well, so you get new information and bringing that on. I think that's important. I think something I've noticed, because I work in the diversity inclusion space and coaching, I've started doing some different things. I think it's just being aware of what others you might not see, sort of what's in front of you with the client, right? So being aware of that, they might share it with you, they might not. Partnering helps. Like, I've had some clients who had no idea we're neurodivergent, and they're like, oh, this is really helpful because I'm this or that, and it's actually shortened, you know, that's information, that's how you partner. Something I also did, because I'm mixed race, but not everyone picks it up, and I put it on there. I work in the diversity inclusion space, so it made sense. What I noticed happened was that I had a lot more diverse clients. I'm not sure the exact correlation, there might be some other pieces as well, but maybe it goes into being inclusive or making people comfortable. I don't know. I won't know unless I have that conversation, but there is a little bit of a trend. So little things we can do that we're comfortable with too, right? Maybe there's some things that we're not, and that's okay too. And figuring out what they are.
Fantastic. And so that is so important, actually, and as I say, you're having those conversations. Glad you mentioned the neurodivergent bit, because not to put her on the spot, Kate Bailey, I know you're here listening in. I would love your perspective on the neurodivergent side of being inclusive and this whole agenda in coaching. If you're happy to unmute, Kate, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Hello. Hi, Sharon. Hi, everyone.
Hi,
oh, thank you. Yeah, this is something that's kind of I've become aware of because of family situation and realizing my own neurodiversity, actually. So it's emerging for me, but the things that I really noticed it's one of those things where, because it's sometimes not visible, and also it's an emerging awareness. Things like I've mentioned, you know, we were always kind of taught that we shouldn't send our clients notes because they need to take responsibility. I have a lot of clients who have ADHD and they can't remember. So, well, when we work together, they can record in different ways, obviously. But again, I think part of that is respecting that preference, you know, saying, how is it for you and how should we do it? How would you like to do it? So there's that. There's the, you know, sensory breaks as well, having sensory breaks within the session, and those being really explicit, because I find, you know, even on trainings and with clients, so people can have that want to please and be a really good student and sit there, and literally the brain will have checked out, you know, because there haven't been those sensory breaks. So it's just kind of becoming aware of those, really. So those different learning needs and those learning preferences, you know, dyslexia as well being another one, you know, people asking for slides and us having to be just responsive, I guess. So opening that and being responsive and asking those questions.
Thanks, Kate. And I think that's just another big, huge area which I know you and I are working on in the background to raise awareness of, you know, for coaches and coaches in training to be able to take away some real tools to be able to build that in into their practice. You know, there are things like dyslexia friendly fonts, you know, thinking about that on our intake questionnaires. How complex are the questions? If you've got your intake questionnaires, these are again the things that Kate and I have spoken about in before. Website backgrounds for dyslexia as well, you know, the colours, you know, backgrounds that are light with a darker colour font, you know, all of those type of things, so important. And making reasonable adjustments for visual or hearing impairments. And one of the things that we're certainly looking to do here at the Coaching Academy is to make sure that we have enabled things like the accessibility of enabling closed captions on Zoom, so people can make their own choice as to whether or not they have those closed captions available, like on, if they choose to have them on. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Kate, for just sort of chipping in there. Really important for us to consider. Krush, before we sort of move on to sort of the next area that I wanted to sort of talk about, yourself and practicalities, anything you can sort of offer to the coaches that are here today?
Yeah, it kind of links to some of the things that have been highlighted already, but just as an example, I do think that the setup is really important in terms of, you know, when we're contracting with our client or even before that stage, around how they want us to communicate with them, how they want us to share information. So one of the things that I always do and always have done is ask how they want me, you know, how they're comfortable with me challenging them, and letting them know that if it gets uncomfortable, because I am a challenging coach, if that doesn't feel comfortable, letting them know that they can let me know, and that's okay. And then in addition to that, how would they like me to share information with them? Linking to what Kate just said, you know, I've worked with clients that perhaps have a learning difficulty, for example, dyslexia, and they've said, well, actually, you know, I don't want you to send me the contract. Can you read it out loud to me in our first session, and I'll sign it there and then? And I was like, absolutely, that's fine. And so there are some clients, and it's only upon asking that question, are you going to be able to raise your awareness and then act on that appropriately to be able to make the adjustments? And I think that's something that's really important. So for some clients, rather than, you know, just sending them a worksheet, as we often do as part of coaching preparation or reflection, I'll talk them through it on a video so that they can then draw it out themselves if that feels easier, rather than using a pre-prepared workshop that I have thought through in my own mind. So I think these are some of the practical things that we can do to act on the knowledge that we take from things like this.
Wonderful, thank you. You know, again, there's just little things that we can do, and I think it's just about being aware that we might get it wrong, and that's okay. I think sometimes, you know, it's better to it's all about the intent. As long as there is a positive intent, if we get it wrong, well, then it raises our awareness and we can change. And as long as we embrace that and we're open to that change, great. Certainly what put me on this journey was about 2.5 years ago. You know, I'd been aware of it, but I would probably just made an assumption, the people that I'd been coaching, that, you know, that I was coaching with unconditional positive regard, and that was enough. And I was, you know, I was being inclusive. And it struck me that actually I needed to do something different. And it wasn't coaching that actually taught me this. And if you just indulge me for a moment, just want to share with you what it was that actually brought me to wanting to start to move this agenda forward with the ladies that are here, the guests here today, and in the bigger scheme of things at the Coaching Academy. And as I say, it was just about 2 years ago. It was in the pandemic, and I was really enjoying myself doing lots of online shopping. And I am a little bit of a lover of Karen Millen. I know there are other people out there, but that's who I like. And I was looking online, and all of a sudden I'd noticed, never assumed before, I had noticed that they had become, and rightly so, much more diverse in their models. Yeah, so the models that were showcasing their dresses online. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my goodness, this is really interesting, because I'm not sure I could see myself wearing that. And all of a sudden I thought, well, that's interesting, because if Karen Millen had always been, as it was up until recently, lovely, well, I say lovely, skinny white females showcasing their dresses, who else wasn't able to see themselves in those products? So for me, that showed my assumption. Because I saw it was accessible to me, I made an assumption that it would be accessible to everyone. That allowed me to step out and look through a completely different lens, which actually really grew my awareness of right, okay, so what does this mean in coaching? You know, do people say, great, but I don't see myself represented? And, you know, we know also coaching is wonderful. It's transformational, but actually it's a privileged few who can afford it. So that's another area as well, isn't it? Just for us to sort of consider. So with that in mind, and we've just sort of spoken quite a lot about the different things, maybe reasonable adjustments that we may or may not want to consider. I really want to sort of be mindful and reflect on what coaching structures or processes that may unintentionally disable, is that the right word? Disempower your clients or potential clients. So a question to all of my guests, and then I'm going to pop you guys into some breakout rooms, because I want you guys to have a chat about this stuff. If we are to build inclusive coaching solutions, which I know all of my guests are, what's the one thing that you guys are doing? Let me start with Leonie. So I know you're building very inclusive coaching solutions, Leonie. What one thing can you share that you're doing for that?
So one of the main strategies that I'm using at the moment is creating my own learning principles for my whole coaching practice. The reason why I'm doing that is because, like I said, this is a topic that's infinite. There's a lot happening, and it's about me governing myself to make sure that there's pillars that I'm standing by when working through with my clients. And the reason why I brought up critical thinking before is because that's actually, I'm going through the iteration process of my program, and critical thinking is going to be one of the main pillars of that program. So that's just one example. Another example could be intersectionality, for example. So kind of bypassing diversity, bypassing inclusivity, and thinking actually what are people's individual needs and how does that layer up. So that's going to be a learning principle in my program, and it's about taking ownership of it. So for me, this strategy works because I create something that I'm proud of, but I'm also creating something that the client will feel empowered as they go through it, if that makes sense. So that's one of the main things that I'm doing at the moment, and it's a great transition period because I feel like the same way our values change over time, so does our learning principles, depending on the type of people that we're working with. But it's been great, and that's kind of the main thing that I would lead with, definitely.
Lovely, brilliant. Just conscious of time, Merlinder, Krush, because I want to get some people into some breakout rooms to have a nice chat. Coaching solutions, Krush, what one thing you're doing?
So just challenging myself, I think, is my biggest thing, to be honest with you. As simple as it sounds, we challenge our clients all the time. It's challenging myself, my own unconscious biases, and making sure that I'm remaining person-centered.
Lovely, thank you. Merlinder, for you?
Mine's very similar to Krush's, looking at myself, especially in the coaching, and building that awareness. There's always new stuff. I mean, Kate, thanks for those examples, because, some things that I might have been aware of, other ones like, oh, okay, I'm thinking about that differently now. So keep doing that. I think there's always more to do there.
Well, that's fantastic. And what a rich conversation we have had today. And I would like you, as we draw this to a close, just to consider what impact today has had on you, listening to all of the rich conversations and the rich contributions from my guests here today. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Leonie and Krush and Merlinder for their time and their fantastic contributions. But I'd like really for you to have a think about what impact today has had on you. And on reflection, listening to the information that we have started to talk about today, what adjustments can you consider in your coaching and your coaching business going forward? And also think about, what do you think needs to be done to make sure the coaching profession is as diverse as possible? As usual, thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been a really rich conversation and one that we will continue. There's much more on the horizon, but from me and from the whole crew here at the Coaching Academy, until next time, see you again soon. Take care.
Thanks very much for watching. Hoping you found the content today really, really useful. Look out for more tools, resources, videos from the Coaching Academy, and enjoy. See you soon.